Hi there. Back in January, I was creating cards with a friend and I wasn't filming the cards that I was making, but I showed one of the cards on Instagram and lots of people wanted to see a video, and I'm finally getting around to doing that video. So here's the card that I'll be creating today, and while I'm creating, I'm going to give you lots of die cutting tips. If you saw my last video, I shared a few die cutting tips there, and I'm going to share some more here. So you can see there's die cutting in the background of this card, along the borders, and even some die cut inlay that took no time at all. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into the die cutting. I have an intricate large hugs die from Paper Tray Ink. Now with many large intricate dies like this one, sometimes it doesn't want to cut completely through when you run it through a die cut machine like you do with most dies. So as I pick this up, you'll see that it didn't cut completely through. This is common. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with the die. It's just large and intricate. And if you add a shim underneath it, it'll cut beautifully and you'll get great results. So the shim that I prefer to use is the Memory Box metal adapter plate. And I've showed this in a previous video. I just slid it underneath my bottom cutting plate, and now I'm going to run it through again, and it'll cut beautifully this time. If you don't have the metal adapter plate, you could instead use a few layers of cardstock as a shim under your cutting plate, and that should add enough pressure to cut nicely. Now I'm going to take this die cut out, and I really want those tiny little pieces to stay in my die cut, in the hugs die cut. But when I peel it up, it's sticking to my cutting plate. You can see some of those little pieces came out. I want to keep them connected. So here is the trick that I do to keep those pieces in the die cut, not stuck to my cutting plate and not stuck to the die. So this is the trick. I showed a variation of this in my last video. I take a dryer sheet. I'm using bounce dryer sheets because that's what I happen to have. My husband works at P&G, so I support that company. But you can use inexpensive dryer sheets by all means. I am taking it and folding it, so I have 4-ply. You can try more or less plies if you want to. And I'm going to run my die through with that dryer sheet. Now what's happening is some of that stuff that's on dryer sheets that makes your clothes nice will kind of transfer onto the die and coat the die and allow the die to release the die cut, so nothing will get stuck in the die. I also take the dryer sheet and rub it on my cutting plate, and this will keep it from sticking to my cutting plate. Now it doesn't always work, but about 99% of the time it does. And sometimes I even run the folded dryer sheet through between the cutting plates just so it kind of puts some of that coating on the cutting plates so the die cut doesn't stick to that either. Now you can reuse that dryer sheet over and over until it basically falls apart. You can get many uses out of it. Okay, so now I'm going to run the same die through with some white cardstock, and watch, when I pull it out, it actually cuts beautifully. So I am going to have all the little pieces still inside that hugs die cut. It's not stuck to my die, and it's not stuck to the cutting plate either. So you can see how beautiful that die cut this time. So that's a little trick to use the dryer sheet to coat your die and your cutting plate. I didn't come up with that idea. It's been around for a while, but I wanted to share that. Sometimes it's very helpful. Here's another tip for you. I want to make sure that all those pieces stay in that die cut. We went through the trouble of using the dryer sheet, so I want to make sure they stay there. So I'm adding a little bit of tape. This is micro pour tape. It's great to use for crafting, to the back of my die cut to keep all those tiny little pieces in there. I'm just tearing little pieces and sticking on there. It doesn't take long at all. You could use Scotch tape for this or any kind of tape that you may have. But this makes sure those tiny little pieces stay put. We're going to do more with that later on. You could just glue this down onto your card, but at this point I wasn't sure if I wanted to kind of pop dot this onto a card or do an inlay or what. So I just wanted to make sure they all stayed in there. And now we don't have to worry about any of those tiny little details falling out of our die cut. Next, I want to inlay that hugs die cut into the gray background, so it's stuck in there like a puzzle piece. So I need to create my gray background. I have about a 2" by 5.5" piece of light gray cardstock. I'm going to die cut that same hugs die from this, kind of towards the top of the piece, so I have room for a stamped sentiment below it. Now I didn't do the dryer sheet trick this time, but it didn't matter because I didn't need to keep all the pieces. However, that coating is still on my die and on my cutting plate, so you can see it didn't stick any of those pieces behind. It all stays in the die cut nicely. Now I do need to keep this little piece right here. We're going to need that later on, so I'm going to put that somewhere safe. Now I also wanted to add some faux stitching to the top and the bottom of this piece. This is a set of border dies from Lawn Fawn. This is a fantastic die set. Now they're still connected. You can cut them apart with wire cutters, but I left them connected because I thought it'd be fun to do some techniques with them connected, and I'll talk about that later. I'm just using the one border die on the end. It creates tiny little pierced dots. I'm putting it along the bottom of this piece of cardstock and running it through my die cut machine, and then again across the top of this piece. Now this doesn't actually cut anything from your paper, it just puts those little pierced dots, and I think it's a fantastic finishing touch that really makes a big difference on a simple card. Okay, so next I'm going to do those little orange strips that you see with some more faux stitching right outside of that gray piece. So I've cut some orangish pink, it's like a coral color, from My Favorite Things. It's called Persimmon cardstock. It's just one of my favorite colors. Cut 2 thin strips, and I'm going to use one of the other border dies in this set for this piece. So this will do some diagonal stitch lines. Again, it doesn't cut through, it just does like a piercing, and I think it's a fantastic look. Again, you could cut these each apart with wire cutters, but I haven't kneaded them apart yet, so that's why I've left them together. Okay, so now I'm putting some anti-static powder tool onto my cardstock because I'm going to do some white heat embossing. I have a sentiment here from Mama Elephant. This is a great stamp set. I really like the sentiments in here. I'm going to use that I think you're all sorts of wonderful. Thought that would go nicely with the hug sentiment. So I'm inking that up with Versamark ink and stamping it towards the bottom center of this gray piece. I really like having the Simon Says stamp grid paper in the background. It helps me line things up and center things as I'm stamping. I'm heat embossing this with Hero Art's white embossing powder. So this sentiment will be very light against this light gray background, but sometimes I think that's fun. I always seem to do my sentiments in bold black ink, but I think for this card it's nice to have the sentiment soft so we can have pops of color here and there. Now it's time to create our inlay look. So we're going to do die cut inlay where you piece things together instead of layering them on top of each other. I have a piece of white cardstock. It's 4 inch by 5 1/4, and it's just going to be my background. It's going to hold all my pieces together. So I covered it generously with some dry adhesive, and I'm starting with my top border, adding that right up against the edge of the white. Then I'm going to put my gray piece right up against that and press it down nicely. Now there will be adhesive exposed there where it says hug, so we can add our other pieces later. And then below that, our other border strip. Again, you could layer all these pieces on top of each other, just gluing one on top of the other, but I really like the look of that inlay. Okay, so now we can take that hugs die cut that we created. It's got the tape behind it. That's okay. You can just pop it right into place into the gray. Now remember, we kept that other little gray piece there. You can see it right there on the right. We're just going to pop that in place too. So we have one continuous layer there. Then you can just press it around with your fingers or with a bone folder just to make sure all the pieces are pressed into the adhesive and fit into each other like a puzzle piece. And now for the fun part. When I put this card up on Instagram, everybody's like, I can't believe you took the time to inlay all those little colorful pieces into that hugs word. Well, I completely and totally faked it. I didn't put each of those pieces in. That would have taken forever, and I don't even have the patience for that. So here's the trick I did. You remember we have all those pieces still in that hugs die cut. You can see them all inlaid in there. We had them taped in. So I'm coloring them in now that they're there. So I'm coming in with Copic markers because Copics, if you don't press hard, have a very fine tip. Adding a little bit of color to each of these inlaid pieces. You could use absolutely any color marker or colored pencil for this, anything with a fine tip. So this takes a tiny bit of time to add color to each of these tiny pieces. However, it's a lot less time than it would take to inlay each of these tiny pieces, putting them into this die cut. So I am totally faking it. I probably shouldn't have told everybody and made you all think that I really did inlay each of these, but I'm not that crazy. So anyways, I did 2 shades of green here just to give the look of dimension. I did YG23, which is a lighter green, and YG17, which is a little bit darker. I did get out of the lines on my white S here, so I'm kind of erasing some of that green with the colorless blender, the 0 marker. That's one of the benefits of Copic, is you can kind of erase with the colorless blender, or you can use a white gel pen to cover it up. For the flowers, I wanted to add that coral color, so I used R14. I think it'd be fun to do a few of these cards in a bunch of different color combinations. Okay, now for my favorite part of this card, which is the background. This is something that looks like it took forever, but it was very quick. I'm back to that Lawn Fawn border die set that I showed you earlier in this video. Now I'm going to use this die repeatedly on the back of a white note card. I'm starting on the edge of the front of a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card, and I'm just going to do this repeatedly to cover the front. Now remember, I have these border dies still connected by the wire. I haven't cut them apart. However, if you have cut them apart, all you have to do is space them how you want them, upside down, put some tape along the back to connect them back together, and then you can go and do this process with them just taped together. They don't need to be still connected by the wire. Now I'm just going to repeat this until I cover the whole background here, and I love the look of all this faux stitching on the back of this note card. This technique is a great way to get more out of any border die sets you may have. So you can see the complete note card background has that faux stitching. It looks really cool. Then all I have to do is adhere our die cut inlay piece onto the front. Now I wanted to add tiny little yellow pearls to the center of the four little reddish colored flowers we have on the card. I'm using some Hero Arts yellow pearls. However, I was worried that the adhesive that comes on the back of them, just like the sticky dot, that it wouldn't hold up in the mail because this is going to be mailed far away. So I'm using some super strong adhesive. This is Ranger Multi-Medium, and it is matte, so if any oozes out, you won't see it. And I have a fine tip nozzle that I added to the bottle so that it's easy to get tiny little areas of the adhesive. So I'm taking the pearls and actually pulling them off the adhesive that it comes with. And then I will add that to the center of each of the flowers where we have our liquid adhesive there. And I will be sure that this adhesive will hold up much better in the mail. Sometimes I like to do this if I have an embellishment, I squirt a little extra of that strong adhesive under it so I can make sure it gets through the mail nicely. So that wraps up this card, but before we go, I wanted to show you a variation on it. Remember how I said I did this card back in January? So this card on the left is actually the one I did in January, and I wanted to show that to you. It's a little bit different. In the background, I did an embossing folder, a quilting embossing folder, and it just gives a little bit of a different look. And instead of inlaying all the pieces on the hugs part, I glued them on top of each other. I did keep all those tiny little pieces in the hugs die cut and colored them with the marker, but I glued everything on top of each other. So it's just a variation on the same design. So there we have it. I hope you found these die cutting tips helpful. If you have any questions, you can head over to my blog at jennifermcguireinc.com or leave them below here on YouTube in the comment section. I also link to everything that I used in my YouTube description and, of course, over on my blog. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you'll come back for another video soon.